Hello, guys. My name is Francisco Gutierrez, and I am a sophomore majoring in public health science. So, now on to my video. The topic of my proposal revolves around learning, specifically how children are able to learn. My curiosity to research learning comes from personal experiences growing up and the techniques I have come to see being used. Not only this, but it is through my research that I have come to learn that there are actually better ways of learning. I I thought learning was simply just learning. Apparently, it's a little more complicated than that, I found out. One of the articles I read deals with how students' ability to gesture while being taught facilitates their learning experience. Basically, what they did is they compared the utility of gesture to a speech alone strategy. The result was that the gesture used was predictive of learning for children. Another article I read deals with how two groups can differ. So basically, this study had two groups, one from Hong Kong and one from Germany. The kids from Hong Kong were instructed with lecture only and very few play. The Germany kids had more activities that involved play and learning and less lecture. The results turned out that those from Hong Kong only remembered the playing activities, while those from Germany remembered the learning part of the playing activities. So, both of these articles deal with two very different ways in which a different style of teaching was actually beneficial for the students, and is what led me to my research question, which can be more simply put: what is the best method for learning when it comes to children? This also led me to my hypotheses, which is children who learn through interactions and activities are more likely to retain the information than those who learn through the traditional way of lecture only. On a larger scale, this research, I believe, can truly have an impact on how we go about teaching. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention states that chronic disease is the health challenge of the 21st century. To put this into perspective, 75% of healthcare costs are attributable to chronic disease. 7 out of 10 Americans die every year from chronic disease. The next section of this video is going to be about my research proposal. If I were to summarize my research proposal in one sentence, it would be most likely something along the lines of: this experiment addresses the question of which method of learning is best for children by looking at two very different ways to approach teaching. So my participants will consist of 32 kids in 5th grade from different elementary schools in the Santa Clara County. The students will be picked out by using random sampling. For the purpose of this experiment, we are going to assume that the 5th grade level kids aren't exposed to any psychology. So procedures. First off, the 32 students will be placed in one of the two groups using random assignment. Random assignment will be determined by the flip of a coin. There will be a total of two groups named Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 will be lectured at 11 a.m. on a sunny, warm day, while the Group 2 will be lectured the following day at the same time if the weather is the same. Both groups will receive the same lecture on classical conditioning from Mrs. Margit in the same room, O'Donnell 105. However, Group 1 will only get a lecture, whereas Group 2 will get that same lecture, but with an activity at the end. At the very end, both groups will receive the same test. So, measures. The dependent variable will consist of scores from the test from the two groups. The independent variable will be the activity that the activity that Group 2 receives. The control group will be Group 1, and the experimental group will be Group 2. So far, my hypothesis still remains the same. Children who learn through interactions and activities are more likely to retain the information than those who learn through lecturing only. This brings me to my analysis, which is to test this hypothesis. I will compute the scores of both groups' tests and compare them, taking into consideration the reliability between each groups, but also the validity between the two. By this I mean that the scores within each groups must be similar and thus be reliable, and in the end, if my hypothesis is to be right, the mean of the two groups must be drastically different as so to be valid. When thinking about some of the strengths of my study design, I something that comes to mind is random assignment. There's definitely no worries about bias. There is the potential for a large impact on how we think about learning, and it could also be the key to prevention of many chronic diseases. As far as weaknesses, I could only really think of one, which was my sample may be too small. Maybe some of you can think of others. In the end, someone once said, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn." Finally, to end on a more serious note,